The events of our story begin with the reincarnation of the protagonist, named Michael, with great shortness of breath. He stands covered in blood and stares forward. Right above him are the monsters. They are quite evil and horrible. They are looking at him with a desire to devour him right now. Our hero picks up some object and talks about how the worst part is now, not at the moment of reincarnation as he had previously thought. Hold that weapon in your hand, along with some little monster ally below. Michael attacks his new enemies. A few days before, our hero woke up with a wild shock. Then on his face, I realized I had become completely different. However, he got used to his new identity rather quickly and the new life that came with the changes after reincarnation. The world in which he was reborn is very similar to Earth, however. The technology here has gone too far by Earth standards. Well, technology here is only a secondary problem. The main one, the huge monster birds that live everywhere. Monsters in this world, not always evil, but on the contrary, they are directly related to the life activity of each person and act as a help. The only problem is that they perform not only in the usual aid, but also military, which already appears as a threat. A great many of these beasts are designed to kill, as are the warriors who control them. In this world, the power of a country, its status and position in geopolitics is measured by the power of an army of flying beasts. After learning all this, our hero set a goal to become one of the strongest in this world, because only practical strength is respected here. The first thing he decided to do was to make a plan, as well as decide who he was and where he was, for a general understanding of the situation. The very first thing that surprised him was a girl with purple hair, named Jessica, that he met at his house. A girl named Jessica started laughing with our hero, saying that did he really decide to wake up so early? Michael immediately realized that this girl was the sister of the body's past owner. But what he noticed most was the badge on her chest. Our hero glared at him, and Jessica took that as a bad sign and abruptly started hitting him. The blow turned out to be very powerful for our hero. He could not closely understand how such a girl had so much strength in her hands. She retorted that she was already a martial arts master, so she would be no good to be trifled with in such a situation, even for Michael. Michael started to press the point that her own brother was her brother, and it wasn't appropriate to hit him, but realized that the past owner of the body might have had a bad relationship with her. Jessica began to ask Michael if he had forgotten about all his punishments and began dictating a huge list of things he had done. However, here, out of all her stories, our hero was stricken by the fact that he turned out to own an animal store, which sounded interesting. Using the navigator, our hero went there, but come out to some garage. He didn't find his store at all, which surprised him. However, here, the hope of discovering something serious inside kept him on his toes, so he decided to go inside after all. Inside was a warehouse with a bunch of stuff for the animals, including cages with them. Michael noticed right away that the animals were shitting on him a lot. Before our hero even realized what was happening, he was hit from behind by a foot directly in the back with great speed. It was applied by a guy with green hair, and standing next to him, a huge black dog. He started waving and greeting Michael. Our hero asked him who he was, and he immediately replied that it was not nice to forget regular customers. He complained that he'd left his dog here, and Michael had locked him up for 3 days and wouldn't even let him out to eat. Realizing his guilt, Michael began apologizing, talking about how he didn't mean to do it that way and was ready to take the blame. However, in response, the client stated that he didn't care all that much. He had instructed his dog to attack Michael. Immediately after which this happened, a huge dog with a savage aura of blood and thirst for death began to attack our hero. Michael did not have time to realize what was happening, and in a second, the dog was behind him, having previously taken our hero in the ring. With a special iron tail, he took his neck in his sights, thus immobilizing him, cutting off all avenues of escape. The client started talking about how it was impossible to pay off with money after such a thing, because his beast had been a fighting beast and was now tainted. Well, right after saying that, the client stated that there was one thing he had come up with that might help. Immediately afterward, the client ordered his beast to demonstrate a powerful beast attack to Michael. Noticing the bright glow of energy, our hero began to plead for it not to be done, and also began to say that this beast was too strong. But no words were stopping him. The monster had already created a stream of energy and was about to direct it directly at Michael. Started to realize that he was about to die and complained that he had been reborn into such a weak fool when he could have been a normal person. After that, the monster still used its energy flow and attacked Michael with it. But our hero did not feel any pain at all. The client who attacked Michael, along with his monster, froze in place and could do nothing, turning to stone. A system window appeared in front of Michael and informed him that the contracting process was beginning. This pleased our hero greatly. He realized that the teacher system was finally on. However, here was a message on the system alerting him that the contract would be linked to Michael's store. He was surprised that this bum was linked to the store. In the moment, our hero awakens abilities that can save him in such a situation, help, and keep him safe. The system informs our hero that he has gained new abilities that have made him invulnerable. At this point, time reverts back, but the activated abilities remain with our hero. A repeat of the situation begins. Michael's opponent, the monster, starts sending a bolt of energy directly at our hero. However, here, in just a blink of an eye, Michael grabbed his nose, started squeezing it, and talking about how nothing was going to work now. Immediately after that, Michael gave the order for his opponent monster to lie on the ground, and that immediately succumbed to the order. Our hero looks at the customer and tells him that now he doesn't want to proceed with the order, and something makes him uncomfortable. With wild shock, the client began to talk about how he had never seen such strong people with such abilities before in his life. Michael approached the client and talked about how if he wanted to, he could take care of his pet very quickly and easily. With wild shock, the client is frightened by this. They start running away and talking about how no more services are needed and they can handle it themselves. Michael couldn't understand at all what had happened, why his client was so frightened. Did he really look that scary, he thought. In a moment, our hero was distracted by the system. It appeared and informed him that he had received a store update. He began to consider the upgrade and rejoiced that his system was so smart, well laid out, and quite elaborate. In the moment, after Michael agreed to the upgrade, a puff of energy appeared around and started blowing things around. When the renovation was over, Michael had a beautiful kitchen around him and lots of comfortable places to work, which made him very happy. He decided to open the room next door, and going in there saw some monsters lying on special mechanisms. Michael started pointing the system with his face at these mechanisms and talking about how monsters can shred the new update, and that's terrible. However, when Michael got up to look, he immediately noticed that they were quite strange and were behaving unusually. But what pleased Michael was that they looked pretty good and very even nice. The hero realized that he would find common ground with them. The system abruptly announced a new change in front of Michael. Beneath his feet, a special portal appeared. Unknown. Along with the monster, our hero was sent to some other planet through this portal, which surprised me greatly. Michael was in a wild shock. He didn't understand what was happening at all, and how he was going to get out of here, and what to do with the pet. Our hero looks up at the large tree, its size, as well as the unusual blue crystal around it. While our hero is surprised by the size, the monster is clearly frightened by something else. The monster himself is named Barsik. At one point, a huge monster appears from the side and starts breathing fire directly into our hero, which pisses him off a lot. Through the system now, Michael discovers what he needs to complete the quest that was given in return for the upgrade. However, here are his conditions, characterization, and what is given to our hero pisses him off a lot because it looks like bullying. Immediately afterward, a contract began between Michael and Barsik to continue the assignment. There were very different monsters around, all of which looked very dangerous. It scared Barsik a lot, but here was Michael holding on. The monsters that inhabit this place turned out to be very strong and aggressive. They attacked each other and devoured. Our hero gave Barsik the order to attack. According to his characteristics, the monster opponent was less than 100 m, so there was a chance. Barsik started to attack, but it turned out very badly. He crashed into the opponent and could not do anything. Our hero has realized that Barsik's strength is not enough, so it's worth pumping him up, and he begins to learn the system. After several attempts, our hero successfully managed to revive Barsik, give him new powers, and send the fight. Right after that, the monster started attacking its opponent, and attacking it quite powerfully, which delighted Michael. Our hero watched the battle closely, giving clear orders on what to do and how best to attack. Barsik listened attentively to Michael. This helped him to choose the best positions and points for So, which led to a practical victory. Michael started smiling and talking about how it was just wonderful that they had made it, which meant they were on their way to total victory. However, lo and behold, Barsik's opponent had new abilities that helped him attack correctly and clamp down on Barsik. Our hero began to use extra energy reserves to improve Barsik again and revive him. This pleased him greatly. And because of this, they would be able to achieve great success in the future, not only in this battle, but in future ones as well. After that, Michael helped Barsik activate the lightning ability so that he could finish the battle quickly and win. However, despite this success, the ground beneath Michael abruptly began to shake. He began to fall and realized that something was going wrong. Already a second after that, the ground began to burst and fly upwards, on the way crashing everything around, which frightened our hero even more. At that moment, right out of the darkness, different monsters began to appear, and looking directly at our hero, they were many times larger than the past opponent. A second afterward, a powerful blow came sharply upon our hero, his pet, and knocked them down. Michael realized that the opponents are very strong. We broke 6 of his ribs with one attack. He began to think about whether it was worth fighting. Our hero has resigned himself to the fact that he can't do anything about it anymore, because the enemies are too many, they are too strong, and he is alone and weak. So he made the decision to just relax and stand still, waiting for his fate, not resisting at all. Just a second after that, Michael's Barsik abruptly attacked the monsters. With the speed of lightning, he flew at their mouths. In a moment, Michael realized it was worth fighting, and for an hour they fought the monsters, after a time, finally defeating them. Well, even after this battle ended, things didn't stop. A huge monster appeared right out of the ground that was full the whole time. The new opponent didn't hesitate and immediately attacked Michael, attacking him with rather powerful attacks. It was extremely fortunate that Michael was able to dodge this attack and the slime didn't get on his skin. He was able to stay alive. At this point, Michael began to point his pet forward, talking about how they still had some goals left. Some time passed. The fight was over. Michael and Barsik were already completely exhausted, but the system reported that the mission was over. Most of all, our hero was surprised that after finishing the task, Barsik's strength increased. It pleased him. Michael smiled and was happy about it, however, more than anything. At that moment, he wanted to just go home. The exit of the story takes us to an electro concert in the city, to which a lot of people have come, waiting for the show to start. A girl named Roxy came to the concert, however. She had some goals, but could not fulfill them in any way, because of which she was disappointed. She couldn't be happy about the holiday and was severely mentally depressed. She thought back to the monsters and people she had fought. Roxy had one single goal in mind. She wanted to get herself a thunder mouse like Barsik. She goes to town and tries to find something that could help her, but so far she hasn't found anything. Roxy came to our hero's store, however. She noticed that he wasn't here and realized that she got here in time. To make sure Michael wasn't here, Roxy asked the clerk, but there was silence. At that moment, the door was opened and Michael walked into the room and said hello to Roxy, surprising her. Roxy turned to Michael and stated that she had left the vegetable a month ago, and now she wanted to pick it up to use in battle. This news upset the Jersey, but he didn't let it show and only asked for payment in order to pick it up. Here, however, Roxy does notice something that Michael is in a rather sad state of mind, which surprises her quite a bit at this point. Our hero goes to the room pet. He picks up the Thunder Mouse, Barsik, and starts wearing him. Before giving it to Roxy, Michael asks to remember it, and not to forget it then when Barsik comes home, as well as an epic fight. A system appeared in front of Michael. It reported that by a special potion, he could become a Beastmaster. And of course our hero agrees, he finds it quite necessary, and immediately takes himself this potion. Through his watch, Michael knows the fact that he has only expended 1 point of energy. This surprises him greatly, for it is rather small. Trailing off, Michael notices that he's only been paid 100 for pumping the mouse to massive proportions, which is very little. Meanwhile, right on the concert started battles as went, they are very often held, and today will be the same. Quite strong. One of the monsters is a mutant tiger that is very strong, fast, most importantly massive. His owner is very happy with the monster he has. He talks about how winning for him here is obvious, as it always has been before. The main uncle, who is watching the fight, says that it will not be interesting because the opponent of this guy is very weak. And the opponent herself is Roxy, who along with the mouse came out for this fight, but she already realizes that she is about to lose. Roxy realizes that her mouse can't fight anymore. If nothing is done now, it's the end for her career already. Roxy's opponent, talking about how she should have surrendered sooner as his monster is already preparing an energy attack. Immediately afterward, the master of this monster, and you are this order to launch a full energy attack on Roxy. The attack was very powerful and huge, so much so that a special dome was raised to protect the spectators. However, in the moment, Roxy notices that so-and-so didn't come to Anya. She wasn't hurt at all, and she's standing all intact. Her opponent looks at her with contempt, saying that she was very lucky to have surrendered in time because she would have been dead by now. Roxy began to wonder what she should do. Seeing out of all her monsters, there was still one Grandmouse left, who was obviously very weak. However, she was also well aware that if she were to use a mouse in battle now, she would most likely die, and that would be the end of it. The crowd of onlookers started yelling at Roxy and asking to be created, and talking about how it was already over for her as her beast. Roxy is about to announce that he's staying, but right at that moment, a mouse bursts into the fray and starts attacking. Seeing this, Roxy's opponents immediately say that they will attack non-stop and open full fire. However, Barsik isn't so weak anymore either. He begins to pull the energy down to him, so much so that the floor beneath him breaks. Seeing such a huge amount of energy in her pet Roxy is quite surprising. She talks about not believing it simply. All decides to help her mouse. She uses the power of energy, combining it with Barsik's energy, thus making him stronger. What happens on stage amuses the main uncle a lot. He laughs and talks about how he couldn't have imagined it. Barsik, meanwhile, makes his serious, very powerful, even lightning-fast attack right into his opponent, knocking him down. The thunderclap technique that Barsik used was so strong that it broke through the dome of the defense. At this moment, all the trainers were greatly surprised because the normally Grandmouse used level 7 attacks as well. Just one such I so desired in order to extinguish and get rid of the enemy immediately and instantly. The owner of the enemy monster was very surprised, dumbfounded, and upset by what happened. He didn't come close to expecting such power from Barsik. The host of the show started talking about how it was just unthinkable and very beautiful because it can be called a legendary victory. Roxy, meanwhile, sat still, looking at her pet, and couldn't figure out what had happened. She guessed it was about the store. Meanwhile, our hero Michael was in that very store and was being cleaned up by monsters, of which he had plenty. The host, meanwhile, announced that the show doesn't end there, as there is still one more round left. Roxy's opponent saw himself. He talked about how he should have known from the beginning that this competition was going to be a tough pass. Immediately after that, he decided to act and summoned a huge monster with a huge reserve of energy that he was going to use. Thus, he was delivering Roxy a wussy talk about not being able to use the Thunderbolt now. She in turn also understood the fact that she would have a hard time in this bayou. Ham never thought that he would use such tricks. However, while Roxy was thinking, her pet sprang into action, lunging forward, using energy to stand in front of her opponent. Seeing the fighting stance, the announcer realized everything, waved his hand, and declared the round open to all. Roxy's opponent immediately began to use her strongest techniques and transfer armor energy into the monster's hands with tremendous power. She, in turn, did not even have time to improve her pet as it rushed into the battle and began to attack and run forward. Barsik realized such an opponent against him and also that it would not be easy and began to remember Michael's advice. He overtook the enemy monster and began to attack its owners in order to eliminate all the problems at once. Barsik immediately realized that if the thunderclap didn't work against the monsters, it protested against the owner and his armor. The host talked about it with great joy. Also admiration for how strong an opponent this guy has, meaning Barsik. A moment after that, the bird aide took the enemy away from Roxy so that he wouldn't be harmed further, to get him to safety. Immediately afterward, with great joy on his face, the presenter announced that Roxy, along with her pet Barsik, had emerged victorious. Roxy couldn't believe the news. She thought she was in a fairy tale, or that she was just dreaming, because she couldn't believe her victory. Most of all, she was happy to think that it had been done by the shopkeeper, and therefore he was to be thanked and referred to again. Meanwhile, our hero Michael is thinking about where he can get 10,000 to live, because he can't just rely on the pet store. In the moment, he also realized the fact that he had been in the special space for 3 days had the opportunity to gather a lot of useful things. After that, our hero makes the decision to summon the system and go on a mission, getting his pet and the ability to pump. Immediately after that, he enters a specially designated world where he begins his present quest. The first thing he does is try to figure out how things work here, as well as get his stuff using just the power of thought. This he succeeds in doing, then begins to pull down his energy in order to store it up before a potential fight with anyone. After preparing for battle, he sets off to explore the area, first walking some paths in the woods. Michael began to hear strange noises. He realized that the place further away was dangerous, and therefore the food that was there was much more expensive. On his way, he met the first obstacle. Seeing the monsters, he did not fight them, but grabbed them and began to dodge. Time went forward. Our hero got into different troubles. It made him stronger, and he collected more and more resources. During his time there, he even managed to get into a cave where there was lava, and gathered himself mushrooms there with the power of fire. Not without underwater adventures, being right near the jaws of the shark, he still did not give up and went forward. Since that moment, a lot of time has passed. Using the system, our hero returned home, however, he did not return empty-handed. He managed to collect a whole huge glass flask of all sorts of cool stuff in order to pump pets. The events of our story takes us in some ordinary house. An old grandfather keeps his pet and tells us that he is sick. This grandfather's wife offers to cure with special red stones, but her granddaughter says the situation is critical. However, their rooster sees the red food and immediately grabs it with his beak as if he has seen something that is the most important thing in life. Immediately after he ate this drug, he was back to the way he was before, cheerful and positive and not sick at all. Grandma, along with Grandpa, were very happy and excited about it. They were not expecting this result and were positive. A grandson standing nearby started talking about how there was something wrong here and questioning Grandma there about how she got that feed. She began to talk about how she bought it Nice Man for an expensive price because this food is very unusual. Her granddaughter immediately began to realize the fact that they most likely use illegal substances to produce it, a strong addiction. Grandpa also realized it right away. He guessed it from what Grandma had told him and was shocked by it. Granny stated that she didn't want it at all and bought it at the store from Mike, who talked about it being a healthy feed. After a while, a grandson named Onion arrived on the spot to our hero mother, began to make claims about the feed. Initially, our hero didn't understand at all what it was about, but afterwards he guessed that it was about the new ingredients he was using. Lucas's sister intervened in the conversation. She stated that Michael just needed to be checked as illegal aliens and all talk was useless. Michael was really pissed off by this. He couldn't imagine that hearing such words in his address, supposedly his fodder, was very horrible. He stood up and started talking about how these were all accusations without proof. He wanted to see them before he dealt with them. Lucas also became aggressive in response and said that you can't drive yourself like that at all. You have to sort things out normally. He tried to grab our hero by the neck, but he used the power of energy in response, causing Lucas' fingers to simply break. This hurt Lucas to the point of creepiness. He was in a lot of pain. He hadn't expected Michael's seduction like this and started screaming. Lucas started talking about how he wasn't coming back here again and offered to leave while calling the salesman inadequate. I mean Michael. Michael responded by saying goodbye to them, stating that he was confident in the quality of his feed, also that he had no problems. There were also a lot of people in the crowd outside the store, and some of them wanted to see the new drugs. Michael started introducing water balloons. Lucas's sister started raising her hand and talking about how she had an aquatic-type pet and would love to have them. However, here, Lucas himself tried to interfere with Michael. He wouldn't let him do it and covered everything with his hands, not letting him through to the pet. Our hero declared that he would show the workings of this fruit and thus such a one that his medicine worked perfectly. Immediately after Lucas's sister's pet ate this fruit, it became times bigger, times stronger, and more powerful. A huge amount of energy began to spread out in all directions, hitting everything around with its aura, which was very unusual. Lucas's sister was very surprised at what was happening. She hadn't even close to expecting such a quick effect and such power. Most of all, was surprised by Lucas himself, who did not expect his sister's pet to level up so quickly from the food alone. Lucas's sister herself still couldn't believe it. She considered her pet, wondering if it had been switched. Lucas grabbed his sister's head and began to tilt, and bowed himself as well, talking about how they were apologizing for what they had done earlier. That said, he accepts the apology and also quoted a price of $8,000 for one ball, adding that he is an honest businessman and does not cheat anyone. The people in the crowd began to run to Michael and so herself to ask them to give them such a medicine, calling Michael a divine salesman. When our hero was able to sell all these things, he was overjoyed, declaring that he could finally buy himself that very potion. Summoned the system, and within a minute, the potion was in his hands, and he began preparations before taking it. And just a second after that, he began to take in the potion completely, drinking it down to the very gram. After only a few sips, he began to experience an indescribable effect, absorption, strength, and a new awareness. His body began to tear apart, but at the same moment and put together, a huge amount of energy pulsed through his body. After tiring of all this energy within him, he confidently declared that he was finally a martial artist. His skills and possessions reached like an ideal. He was able to glory a fly with literally his fingers without killing it. Immediately afterward, he began signing contracts by the system, betting everything on his luck for the sake of achieving success. Using the power of the contract, our hero managed to summon a skeleton, his new pet, with a level 2 already in place. Michael was even surprised, and even a little upset that a monster for so many energy points was so ordinary. However, our hero was not sad. He hoped to recover this skeleton and make a diamond out of the stone. But his musings were interrupted by the fact that 2 girls, Roxy, along with her friend, had complained to him. Michael wasn't too happy to see them, since she'd only paid 100 last time for the help he'd given. Roxy was surprised that her pet trembled at the sight of Michael, but was not at all afraid of his opponents. Our hero in turn mocked the Thunder Mouse a little. He stroked it and spoke of how they would be sure to repeat their forays. Roxy stood nearby and couldn't believe what was happening, as Michael was only showing pressure above level 6 with his aura. He turned to Roxy and asked about whether she too had come to complain about his high prices like everyone else. She was wildly surprised at such a question and immediately realized there was a catch in it. She should understand it. Using her smartwatch, she began making bank transfers to Michael's account, adding more money to his account for past work. However, lo and behold, our hero rejected all her translations without explaining the reason, which caused her no concepts and even a little shock. Roxy started reaching out to her friend and asking for money from her as well, saying that it was very important to me. She realized that quality work like Michael's had to be high-paying or it would lose its quality. However, even a high translation like the last one, Michael still rejected it and stood looking at Roxy with a very angry face. Michael received a transfer for as much as 100,000, and already he had accepted it, and asked her what her purpose in coming here was. But since Michael's store is pretty small, the bank rejected that transfer in favor of Roxy, and Michael pretended to agree for free. After that, Michaela watched Roxy's pet and began to name prices for its improvement for each level increased. She in turn realized that every increased level is a huge profit from her too, so she immediately agreed. Our hero Michael immediately accepted this request and began asking about whether any additional services were still needed. Michael started showing Roxy all the things he had around. This caused her great amazement, wanting to buy them. The only thing stopping Michael was that the system restricted many of his sales for strange reasons. After a couple minutes, Michael counted up everything needed to improve Roxy's pet and gave her a price. She was surprised, but agreed to pay. Michael also called up the system and began to look at what he needed to improve his own pet. The system immediately signaled to Michael what he needed to come in and turn in order to make improvements. Right after that, our hero goes on his first quest, on a new improvement that will help him become stronger. The first thing he does is enter some world that is full of blood. Tentacles made of blood wrap around him, and his pets. The very world around him is more like his father's. The floor of this world is made of bones and corpses, and there is only blood flowing around. Our hero tries to somehow resist this odor, however it follows him around, because there are a bunch of dead people around. After a couple minutes of being in this world, our hero faces the first enemies in the face of a huge Kashche. The one immediately strikes at our hero, but Michael abruptly disappears somewhere, which surprises the monster. He manages to get back and used Basic. He deflects this monster's attack, stopping its dice. He began to talk about how apparently not everyone had reached the beast realm here yet, and therefore did not pose much of a threat. Here, the monsters was not at all happy with this prospect. He began to attack and attacked time after time, much to Mike's surprise. Michael turned to his skeleton and Basic. He asked them to organize a combined attack and do a lot of damage to the enemy. Immediately he obeyed orders. He began to draw in all the energy, absorbing absolutely everything around him. After that, he made a huge foe and channeled all his energy directly into the enemy, preventing him from advancing. The attack was very powerful for him. He began to scream and grind his teeth, saying that he didn't expect such power from an ordinary rat. However, lo and behold, a skeleton of this level managed to fend off the Temple Mouse's attack, wounded Basic badly, and started laughing from that. In order to regain his strength and skills, he began to pull all the energy down on himself and attract new skeletons. Noticing the attraction technique from him, Michael realized that the core of this monster would be expensive, worth getting. But here, Michael's monsters thought quite differently. They were quite frightened by such a harsh attack and were no longer so eager to go into battle. Realizing it wasn't going to be that easy, Michael began to pull the book to him and talk about using it for total immersion. The monster at this point wasted no time at all. He began to attack Michael and threaten him with his immense strength. Our hero began using the blood technique he found in the book and energized his pets. This allowed him to strip them of their sense of fear and therefore give a full command to charge at the enemy. However, here, the attempt did not end in luck because the monster managed to repel all these attacks and come out the winner of the battle. Michael began to look at the enemy and analyze his mistakes so he could have more success with his next attack. Well, the skeleton at this time was not slow at all. It began to attack first and was accumulating a huge amount of power within itself. Using the technique of the last distribution, Barsik burst into battle with renewed vigor and began to confront the skeleton. Turned out to be Michael's genius idea. He distributed his pets in such a way that he could make several critical attacks at once. Michael's idea was destined for success, as the Graham mouse fully met its objectives, as did the skeleton. Seeing Michael's opponent, the skeleton was able to take out his crystal, which was very valuable and much to his liking. He liked it for a reason at all. After absorbing it, the skeleton began to emit red energy and also gained a much greater amount of strength. Our hero was about to leave this world with a bunch of benefits, but in a moment he smelled someone's energy from behind. It turned out to be a certain woman. Eyes that were full of blood, she had wings and a dark magical aura. Michael's new opponent was so strong that his system couldn't even determine the opponent's rank. A second after that, the opponent raised her hand and the souls of Michael, his pets, began to be transferred to her. Back in the choice room, Michael was surprised at how strong this girl turned out to be and was able to kill them right away. After using one more attempt, Michael returns to the normal world and turns to ask his opponent about the powers she's using. She begins to use her energy pulling powers again. Our hero asks to be allowed to speak. However, she doesn't go along with it. Our hero realizes that further dialogue with her is useless and chooses another location for the game. However, here, the new place surprised Michael just as much. He saw a long wasteland and the vast number of warriors that are on it. Among them was the very girl Michael had immediately noticed, for not long ago she had been in another world. A second after that, Michael was sent to some place with the Skeleton King sitting in front of him, asking for an explanation of how he got here. One of the warriors held Michael down and wouldn't let them leave. Our hero started talking about just taking a walk. Wrong place to go. Michael began to wonder why they didn't just let him go, or kill him. More likely, this chief is trying to figure something out. In response, the Skeleton King stated that Michael is an unusual person and that he wants to know why he came here and is giving it one last try. At this point, our hero immediately realized that he appreciated Michael's strength, and therefore he has a chance to maneuver. Michael started talking about being the clown of the most powerful man on Earth and came here to test the threat level. One of the king's officers heard this. He gave the order to surround the king and begin defending him from Michael. Behold, however, the king himself considered this order very foolish and in a moment used his power with which to kill this officer. Michael began to talk about how if the king kills his officers, he seems to be willing to fight only with words, his conscience tormenting him for it. In response to this, the king declared that there was nothing in this world that could threaten him, so he had nothing to fear. Our hero again began to show off, and the king did not tolerate it. He used the power of fire and killed Michael. However, Michael proved to be smarter. Even before he died, he used the rebirth technique and instantly resurrected himself and his pets. He began to use his secret techniques that he had learned earlier, saying that this king's stone would be very expensive. After just a couple minutes, Michael managed to get the stone and handed it to his skeleton, claiming it was awesome. Michael's skeleton, named Robert, was very surprised at such a present and looked at such a large bloodstone with great joy. Michael turned to Robert, and asked him to start eating this stone now so that he could get stronger quickly and be ready for battle. Robert successfully absorbs the stone, but by this point, they are already surrounded on all sides by the warriors of the Skeleton King. About an hour passes. Michael, along with his pet Robert and Barsika, have completely dealt with all the enemies and are sitting on a mountain of corpses. But even at this point, they are not given to the fact that the land appeared some new monster, clearly began to aggressively attack. Michael gave his monsters kill orders and intentions. Add past that one more opponent and into the collection wouldn't hurt at all. However, lo and behold, the monster didn't pay attention to anything at all. It just started smashing everything around it and breaking things. This opponent presented a huge threat to Michael himself. He grabbed him with a huge amount of his arms, along with Robert and Barsik. I didn't have time to think of what to do in such a situation and began to rely on the temple's help. It dispensed a huge amount of air energy, and after all, accumulated all the energy near herself and directed it directly into the opponent's body with tremendous force. This completely covered the enemy with huge burns. His body was, and steam was coming from all sides. However, even so, Michael could not determine what kind of monster it was at all, and the attack was not successful. He realized that the chances of survival were getting slimmer and slimmer, so he asked Barsik to use the thunderclap for the rest of his energy. As it happened, Barsik pressed himself as close as possible to his opponent and began to accumulate a huge amount of energy. This attack of Barsika's was very effective. She was able to bring her opponent to the point of being out of control with her body. Michael realized that this was the time to act. He helped Robert out and ordered a plan of attack on the new enemy. Robert stated that he understood everything, ready to attack very quickly and specifically, then began to build up energy within himself. Having accumulated an insane amount of blood energy, he released all of it in a single attack into his opponent. Michael was very happy to see Robert succeed like this, as he hadn't accumulated much energy, but he put on a really strong attack. Back at home, studying the system, Michael noticed that Robert hadn't improved that much, but was attacking quite powerfully. He studied the information about what worlds he had been to and who he had fought, and it turned out that the Skeleton King was also the king of the Hausa. Our hero's monsters by this point were completely exhausted. They had no strength left at all and went to sleep. Michael began to study the things he had collected today. To his surprise, among them, he found a strange map that looked quite unusual. With the help of the system, I learned that you can learn how to use the energy points within your body with this card. This greatly pleased our hero, because it indicated that he will also be able to prevail in his own strength. And this is just great news. Our hero decided to use it after all. He immediately got the full feeling of being transported into some uncharted space. He began to try everything around him and attract different pieces of energy to him, enjoying the space he was in. What surprised him was that he began to see his own core of energy, from which all the main power emanated. Using the system, Michael decided to take one of his potions, thus combining the resulting new energy streams. And this he successfully did. He began to accumulate a huge amount of strength in himself and let it out in different directions. Much to Michael's delight, for he realized that with such strength he could accomplish more tasks and make more profit for himself. In a moment, the system began to tell Michael a sharp intake of breath that confused him. He couldn't figure out what the glitch was. At this point, Michael was conscious of space, so he made the decision to avoid large objects and energize himself. While our hero was circulating energy, he also remembered that in the world there are a lot of martial artists, including his sister. From that moment, some time passes, and our hero returns to his home, dining at the table with his mother. Every day spent at home is uncomfortable for him in one way or another because he is still not used to the habits of the past owner of the body. In the moment, walking down the hallway of the house, I noticed a tremendous amount of energy coming from the room and wee sister. He decided to look inside, and what he discovered was that it also accumulated a tremendous amount of energy within itself, even in sleep. He marveled at the fact that his sister had such capabilities, being he had to strain to do it, and she was able to do it even in her sleep. Stopping outside her door, he began to do a meditation, circulating the energy within himself to get a high result. At that moment, Michael began to feel special waves of energy inside him that were spreading out to the sides, and it surprised him greatly. Our hero was also helped a lot by the fact that his sister was around. He could use her energy too. Jessica immediately felt the energy absorption change. She began to complain that it had become somehow difficult. In a moment, Jessica realized that there was most likely a strong martial artist not far from her who had the ability to absorb energy as well. And of course she was completely right, for that person was even the hero Michael, who used in her energy as well. Our hero Michael at this point rejoices in the fact that he has learned to utilize the power circulation abilities even while sleeping. Meanwhile, our hero Michael is visited by Roxy, along with her friend at the store, and he gives them the pet back. Michael reports that he did everything right and leveled up. Roxy immediately notices the change. As Roxy picks up Barsik, she notices that the other animals are feeling down. She also notices this. Michael chases her away in every way possible, doesn't look in Barsik's direction, and asks her to hurry up and get out. At first, she can't understand what's wrong, but after guessing that most likely they've all gotten used to Barsik by now. But Roxy's friend, at this moment, noticed that the other pets had also gotten stronger, and their bodies had gotten sturdier. Paying attention to all of this, Roxy realizes that Michael went to a lot of trouble. She's embarrassed and thanks him for it. He realizes that Roxy is trying to kinder him and talks about how it's the way of the ears. He won't rip her to shreds today. Roxy pays for the services and goes to the training camp. She decides to test how much stronger her mouse has gotten. Roxy's friend named Fiesta summons her monster at her friend's request in order to test out Barsik's new powers. Fiesta asks her friend in case she gets hurt not to cry, since she herself volunteered for such a fight. Roxy is well aware that Fiesta has used one of her strongest pets and the fight will be hard. She ordered Barsik to begin his attack, whereupon he became energized and immediately began attacking with counterattacks. The Fiesta monster was also not standing still. Crossing his arms, he was ready to use his secret techniques against Barsik. Literally in one Gnaven, he created a huge tentacle that began to block Barsik's progress, thus preventing him from advancing. However, behold, such a barrier turned out to be nothing at all for Barsik. He easily overcame and smashed the tentacles with energy. After that, he started jumping in different directions, thus preparing different energy charges against his enemy. Fiesta's pet couldn't continue to fight normally, as Barsik took him by surprise, creating his clones everywhere. Following that, Barsik, along with all the clones, started attacking Fiesta. She even activated her super shield. Roxy screamed and asked her friend to calm down, saying that she only asked them to get close, they wouldn't attack. So, while the two friends were deciding their relationship, the Fiesta monster started attacking Barsik again, and he retaliated. Being near his opponent's face, Barsik decided to use his dirty trick and made a very angry and crooked face to scare him. Immediately afterward, the Fiesta monster began to retreat, which surprised her very much, for she had not expected him to be such a coward. In the moment, he jumps on his mistress and creates a huge shield around them. Thus, he is trying to keep her safe from Barsik. Roxy was pleasantly surprised that such a huge opponent with such immense strength just hid from her pet. From that moment, time marches forward a couple days. Roxy arrives at the stadium and enters the battlefield against a new opponent. He turns out to be a master pet control candidate, a guy with glasses who can do a lot of things, is a strong adversary. His name is Daniel. His eyes piercing and his smile even more penetrating, he is a rather dark and uncharted man. Danielle immediately summons her monster, which is based on water and energy accumulation techniques, quite a powerful opponent. I don't think Roxy is talking about accepting the challenge at all and starts summoning her pet, thus signaling the start of the fight. The first of her pets she calls a phoenix eagle, which is the exact opposite of Daniel's monster. Immediately at this point, Daniel raises his hand and declares that he surrenders and has no intention of continuing the fight. He smiles and talks about deliberately wanting to play in the first round, not thinking anything at all. He fully confirms his decision. Roxy, together with her pets, cannot understand at all what it means, because speech she has never seen such strange actions. Daniel states that sometimes it takes a pretty powerful lure to catch a victim. At first, she can't understand what it's about, however. Afterward, she does realize the fact that he's utilizing some passion energy on her. Looking up, she notices the fact that a huge web of purple energy has appeared above her, which lasts all around the stadium. And Daniel himself at this moment summons his huge spider with a much stronger energy. Apparently, he is the one behind what is happening. Danielle talks about how he's going to play big. Use those pets that will immediately trash Roxy's entire kennel. He also talks about how before the fight, he studied all the monsters that Roxy has and now has a good idea of what he needs to counter her. Phoenix tries to help his mistress and attacks Daniel sharply, but he stops this attack with his shield. In a moment, he is abruptly startled, his hand begins to burn with flames, and he himself is shaking all over and standing with sweat on his face. Roxy blows the ash off her finger and points to her pet Phoenix, subtly hinting that it was his handiwork. Such actions on Roxy's part upset Daniel very much. He decides to fuck big time and unleashes his attacks on Roxy. All is well aware that her pet may not be able to escape in time, so he uses his defense energy and helps him. Phoenix makes decisions to defend himself. He starts a stream of fire Daniel's pets, but they stop him. Daniel starts bragging and talking about how maybe at least now Roxy can see the difference in their powers. Immediately afterward, Daniel ordered the spider to use the pinch technique and the web began to shrink. Roxy realizes that she needs to do something now so that she doesn't lose. She activates her abilities, specifically the 3-stage enhancement. This helps to contain and so from Daniel's monsters, however does not help at all to break down the barrier they create. The web gets sharper and sharper, it hurts the Phoenix, squeezes it, and Roxy is down. Daniel brags about how well he's doing and asks Roxy to give up quickly, saying that it's part of his plan. Roxy realizes that if she continues now, will only make life worse for her monster, so decides she needs to give up. Well, right at that moment, the Phoenix breaks all shackles and begins to attack sharply with fire in a way that has never been seen before. Daniel is in wild shock. He doesn't understand what happened, and as the Phoenix gets out, he is covered from the fire by the monsters. Those watching the fight discuss amongst themselves how incredible it was and that Roxy has been making history lately. The female referee of the fight grabbed her partner and told him about not daring to even think about Roxy because she had already booked her. Meanwhile, at the end of the wallpaper, the Phoenix belonging to Roxy raised its level, much to her own delight. Roxy looked at him and marveled that having such a high level and talent, the Phoenix still belonged to her. She also remembered that Michael had increased the intelligence level of the Phoenix and the properties of healing abilities, which helps a lot. Daniel, meanwhile, was very angry. He was unhappy with this outcome and wanted to correct at the first opportunity. He decides to utilize his most powerful techniques, having previously accumulated a huge amount of energy within himself. The judges start arguing among themselves about whether such techniques are allowed, but here the general asks them to calm down and says you can. Daniel is having a hard time with what he's doing right now, as summoning such a monster was quite strenuous for him, energy already running low. Roxy realizes at this point that she shouldn't worry, but rather fight, so he uses the defense boost. This decision of hers helped the Phoenix a lot. It got a new defense and broke out to a new level. However, lo and behold, Daniel's monster was also not weak. In just a second, it was already behind the Phoenix's back with an attack. This all scared Roxy a lot. She didn't know what to do in such a situation, because it was the first time she was in it. The judges, meanwhile, began to berate the commander-in-chief, saying that he had made a very stupid decision and the fight should have been stopped. Such power of 2 monsters affected not only Roxy, but also Daniel himself. His strength was already running low. Roxy tried to attack again, but a sharp red beam of energy that came out of nowhere stopped the attack, blocking it. It turned out to be Barsik. He was using a new kind of energy that allowed him to block even such a powerful attack. However, lo and behold, Daniel ordered his monster to completely destroy the opponents, so it immediately began to attack. After all the training and days spent with Michael, Barsik knew immediately how to proceed and activated the healing field. Just a second after that, Barsik and his opponent faced off in a brutal fight, not for life, but for death. Using defense from the dice summoning technique, Optimus says to hide and watch with one eye from behind cover for the fight. Meanwhile, Barsik is busy setting new records. He uses several types of energy at once. Roxy is still in wild shock from the power Barsik has shown. She reflects on the fact that he is out of control. In the battle, a secret warrior also appeared, wearing a cloak, who directed 2 phoenixes directly towards Barsik. In a huge shock from the strength of Barsik was not only his owner, but all the people who watched and saw this climax. Barsik's strength against his opponents was so great that using only energy, he controlled them even in the air. The Secret War, who came to Daniel's rescue, used a special healing circle in order to restrain Barsik. Roxy at this time was very excited for her pet, namely the fact that he possessed high-ranked techniques. Right after he finished the fight, she started hugging him and taking him to her, talking about how beautiful he was. The outcome of the battle was the next thing on everyone's mind, so the announcer announced that Roxy, along with her pets, was the winner. At this time, our hero Michael was busy watching different videos on the internet because how to take care of pets. Michael noticed that other people don't get to raise pets as easily as he does. He began to contemplate introducing his own blog. Meanwhile, Lucas pulled up to Michael's store, stating that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. Our hero immediately declared that there would be no discounts today and pointed to the goods standing nearby with his hand and his gaze. Lucas, along with his sister, were very surprised when they saw such prices because it is more expensive to do the surgery only. In response, our hero indicated that he was not going to lower the prices at all. If they have no money, they can leave. Lucas started apologizing, talking about how he was actually here for a completely different reason, not to buy ingredients. The events of our story tell us that one day a known power awakened in the ordinary world and began to spread energy. Unknown to all the people around the rift, the energies could lead to a completely different planet, which surprised everyone around. In some of these places, powerful monsters began to appear, which were clearly stronger than ordinary humans and posed a great threat. But with such problems came its pluses, because people began to get different resources from other planets, which was very profitable. This dramatic economic development led to people being able to build an entire country in a short time. But afterward, people started destroying themselves when they starting wars based on economic gain. Conducting all these, about 70% of the land became uninhabitable, which greatly affected the overall situation as expected. All those who managed to survive and survived after the wars, among themselves agreed on one common conference and founded a federation. Lucas was told all this and called our hero into their Vanguard to explore the territories beyond the cities. Michael didn't take long to agree, immediately after which, together with Lucas in a car, they went straight to the Vanguard. The local staff of the outpost, very happy to see Michael and only with told of him as an unfulfilled genius. However, here our hero decided to behave modestly and began to talk about how he is an ordinary person, just good at some things. The captain of the outpost turned to Michael, stating that she had heard a bit about him and what he had accomplished at an early age. All around, the expectation was that Michael was about 25 years old, but when he said he was 18, they were shocked beyond belief. They approached Michael to ask where he was studying, but he replied that he was self-taught, which surprised them even more. Michael began to use his energy, saying that he would not join the group, but he would help to find the lost pet. This made the captain angry, and he started talking about how Michael was very young and not watching his words at all. The assistant captain stopped him and told him that he could be given a chance and see what happens and then judge him. To surprise everyone around him, Michael summoned his skeleton, which abruptly appeared with a huge amount of energy behind it. This did surprise everyone, but after a second his head fell off, for he had partially embarrassed himself just now. Michael looked at Robert, noticing that he hadn't even fully absorbed the bloodstone yet, so the energy was growing. Young Lucas began to tell Michael that if his monsters just fell apart like that, he was unlikely to be able to participate in the mission. Michael only smiled and said that it was obviously nothing to worry about and they would succeed because they wouldn't disappoint him. Robert decided to show off his skills. Literally in a second, he was in another part of the room using sword techniques, their art. This caused great surprise to the guys from the outpost, for they had not expected such strength from a small skeleton. After that, our hero was accepted on a mission to the outpost and he began to register in the system. Seeing the full details about our hero, Lucasa was surprised again and really just graduated from high school. Lucas began to mentally prepare Michael for the commission and talk about how if he got in trouble, he would definitely help them through the whole process. After that, our group headed towards some brothers. According to the captain, there was a vault behind them, which they will visit now. This vault contained all the right arsenal, including supersuits and some very cool weapons that are sure to help in battle. The assistant captain began to explain that these suits are simply necessary as weapons, because the place where they go, very dangerous. Michael began to look at all the arsenal that is here, immediately discovering that among them there are very powerful suits. The boys began to choose costumes for themselves, and Michael's choice fell on the basic tapes, with skills for the first 6 stages. Upon hearing Michael's choice, the mate along with the captain started laughing, talking about how it was just silly and ridiculous. Lucas began to explain to Michael that the mission was indeed very dangerous, and the better the weapons were, the better it would be for him. Michael takes the most basic suit and the mission begins. The first thing they do is head out into the open at night. A special stone monster was chosen to move around, but in the moment it was sharply of a kind that surprised everyone around it. It turned out to be another kid from the Vanguard. He was with friendly intentions, and thus greeted his partners. However, lo and behold, from such a sharp attack, Michael along with Lucas suffered a little bit of damage and began to help each other. The guy they didn't meet was named Dan, and he started chatting with the deputy, discussing the recent disappearance of a pet important to them. The assistant captain also decided to introduce the Dan to our hero as a brave warrior and an intelligent man. Yet here, Dan looked at him with contempt and didn't understand what such people forgot here. He thought Michael was weak. In this, the aide decided to stick up for Michael, explaining that his power is at a pretty high level, and underestimating him is clearly not a good idea. Dan turned away at this point and stated that the power case alone is not enough. Experience is also an important part in his opinion. The assistant captain, along with Lucas, tried to protect Michael, but our hero at this point only stood still and looked directly at Dan. Dan turned sharply and looked at the t-shirt, then immediately changed his mind when he saw the man's shiver-chilling stare. Lucas, meanwhile, asks Michael not to pay attention to various strange processes, explaining that they are going through a portal now. Just a couple minutes after that, our entire team from the outpost was in place and ready to clash at the new location. Our team's path lay through a dark, dense forest, shrouded in magical energy and various unusual monsters. They looked around and tried to find the best location for themselves, realizing that the terrain would be quite difficult to traverse. Dan announces that he will go to check first. If he finds anything dangerous, he will be sure to report it. The assistant captain, meanwhile, had spotted a few monsters. A couple of them were quite high-ranked in strength and were hiding in the forest. However, here, Michaela challenged his decision. He asked to borrow the glasses, saying that there was clearly something else there. Dan responded by saying that Michael was talking complete nonsense, and in general he dare not question his judgment, especially on a topic like this. Michael began to explain that the tiger Dan had seen was very rare, and he obviously couldn't be here alone. The captain agreed with Michael and stated that he had also heard about this information, and it was clearly worth looking into before going. However, yes, he still didn't agree with them. He was saying that this was just a normal tiger. He obviously shouldn't be afraid in such a situation. To prove his point, Dan sent his pet straight into battle with this tiger, ordering it to attack. Michael started talking about how if Dana's monster didn't let this animal go now, he would die himself in this fight. In response to this, he started yelling at Mike and talking about how he was totally freaking out and had no right to yell at him. After that, Dan's pet screamed sharply. He started to talk about how he was in a lot of pain and got hit by this unknown monster. The guys began to look amongst themselves. Michael alone was a creature and began to talk about what was going on and how to fight. Michael explained that there's more than one tiger around. There's probably another creature with a bloody spiritual energy ball. Looking forward, Michael began to talk about how where such beasts dwell, there are always creatures with bloody energy as well. Michael began to look ahead at the lake and talk about how it wasn't water flowing in it at all, and most likely the cause was in the same place. Michael reported that there is a bloody spirit monster here, and it is hiding somewhere in the river or is part of whatever living thing is here. A second after our hero's words, right from the river of blood, one huge class that was bigger than an entire sheet rose up. In a moment, everywhere, different bloody portals began to open. From where monsters appeared, our team began to run away from here. Started to study the location and talk about where they should run best. He studied 2 directions and chose the west as the safest way. However, Michael began to contradict them, saying that in this situation it was obvious that they should go straight east, not west. Together, they all jumped on the flying monsters, Mike tiredly talking about how if they really wanted to get results, they were going to have to trust them. Immediately thereafter, the assistant captain, along with the captain himself, gave orders to move eastward on Michael's advice. However, in the moment, the assistant abruptly gives inputs about all the monsters scattering somewhere. It looks very strange and suspicious. He began to talk about how they most likely sensed the presence of the blood beast and feeling weak ran away. Michael began to complain that they should obviously change roads because in this canyon, it was like they were going into his mouth for lunch. The aide began to look at Dan strangely, for he was the one who had thought up the idea of going there for the gorge, and he became sharply excused. The captain began to report that very soon they would reach the end of this gorge, but there some unknown beast awaited them. Upon hearing the alerts about this, Michael turned to the tone and asked for his glasses, under the pretense that he was not using them well. Da was very angry at such a request, but remembering what had happened earlier, he decided to hand over the glasses after all, so he wouldn't be made to feel guilty later. Our hero caught Dan's hand off and thanked him with a snide smile on his face, hinting at his contempt. Using his glasses, Michael began to look forward and noticed a certain woman, a monster that had tremendous power. He immediately informed his partner, adding rank and how best to handle the situation in his opinion. Michael also stated that he would try to take it on, after which he summoned his skeleton Robert in order to start the fight potential. Full of strength and energy, he immediately drew his laser sword and stood opposite his new enemy, fully prepared for battle. Michael turned to the guys. He asked them to hurry up, get downstairs, and start looking for tracks while his skeleton was busy distracting the enemy. The guys from the team went down to the canyon clubhouse and immediately spotted a certain monkey, apparently just what was needed. The monkey immediately began to make special sounds indicating that it was pointing at something and showed them a part of some man's hand. Looking at the piece of arm, Dan noticed the glove, stating that it clearly belonged to someone with the status of captain. This information scared the squad quite well, because if even the captain of the team died, the monster here is most likely very strong. Michael asked to give him part of his hand, but Dan immediately said to forget the idea, since Michael didn't understand anything. Dan came face to face with Michael and started talking about how just because he's been listened to twice doesn't mean he's cool. He threw his hand to the ground and started talking about how if Michael needed it that badly, he was awake to pick it up, which he did. Michael began to examine the hand and talk about how the blood had long since dried, the dark aura still emanating, which was very strange. Immediately after Michael finished examining his arm, he stood up abruptly and began swinging straight for a strike. And just a second after that, Michael landed a devastating punch right to the jaw of his opponent Dan. This caused a wild shock on the faces of all the guys around. They had not expected this to happen. Dan started yelling at Michael and talking about how you can't do that and it's very immoral and uncultured. In response, Michael created a huge sword of energy and aimed it straight for his opponent's neck. The captain saw this and put a knife to Michael's back and ordered him to disarm his pet Robert. Lucas was just suggesting that everyone calm down, asking why he would attack first if things could be resolved peacefully. With you on a cold stare, Michael stated that you're a man brought on by the way he acted with him. A rather tragic and not the most pleasant atmosphere began between the guys, all of them threatening each other in what would be the end of them. Most of all, the squad captain was shocked at what a murderous aura Michael had and how dangerous it was to everyone. Dan started yelling at Michael and talking about just showing up here and not doing anything to him, so he should stop all this. Lucas started talking about how you can't solve these problems with a fight, and in that case, no one would survive in that situation. The hero stated that he is ready to see nothing critical, because according to Dan, he is as useful as a bear's favor. Dan stated that he was willing to be under Michael's command temporarily, but after that, they would have a pretty serious conversation at the base. The head of the squad could not make a decision on how to act in this situation, because on the one hand, Michael is a good guy, but on the other hand, only conflicts. The deputy immediately indicated to Michael that if he decided to do it again, he should expect no mercy. In confidence, the deputy tells Michael about how he doesn't really care, because he's seen Michael in action and thinks he can trust him. Our hero smiled, tilted his head, and declared that he understood everything well and he was fine with it. In a moment, the deputy noticed some strange, bright light in the distance and said the squad should head that way. There are some people in the very place where the sudden outbreak happened. They are clearly being attacked by a strange monster and are dealing high damage. They try to defend themselves, using their power utilization, but it turns out to be difficult. To be more precise, it doesn't work at all. At this point, our squad arrived on the spot. He reported that they had received an SOS signal and had come here to rescue them. The guys who are in trouble report that they are attacked by the monster Costalon, and he is very dangerous, to which the deputy leader of the squad immediately draws attention. In front of them was indeed that very dangerous monster Costalon, who was very strong and was famous for its great endurance. The squad leader realized that things were not good at all. He gave Michael and the others orders to rescue these people quickly. However, in the moment the enemy began to act, then again began to interfere with our guys to save. This made it very difficult. Michael began to turn to the deputy and ask him to hurry up and find a favorable path. The leader was surprised at how quickly Michael came to his senses. The deputy began to turn to the people who had been rescued and started asking about if there was anyone else from their crew left who needed to be rescued. He was surprised by the answer. The humans replied about the wounded, only still level 8 beasts. The deputy dumbfounded that they could be injured. Our hero Michael began to think about how best to act in such a situation because his little skeleton is completely useless in such a case. The guy who was rescued started suggesting that they summon all the monsters in a place and send them against those who are after them. In order to make his idea sound more convincing, he started talking about how his firm would compensate for all losses if the monster died. Dan didn't agree he's such an idea. He talked about how it was just silly illogical, so he would be against it to the end. However, lo and behold, the leader poked fun at this guy's idea and declared that if life was dear to them, they would have to act. This pretty much surprised and even upset everyone else in the squad, as they realized that their pets would most likely die. At the moment, our hero jumped down from a flying bird and summoned his skeleton. The motives for such actions were not yet at all clear. Right after that, the picture that emerged was that Micah was single-handedly facing a huge monster against himself. Lucas's shock had reached a breaking point. He couldn't have imagined that things would turn out this way now. Dan, on the other hand, was pretty relieved at this point. He knew right away that Michael just wanted to play heroes and would most likely die now. At the same time, right in front of the monster on which our heroes were sitting, different kinds of skeletons began to appear, right out of the ground. The deputy immediately noticed that these skeletons were not targeting them at all, for they were not dropping absolutely no reaction. At this point, our hero Michael made it known that he couldn't leave his Robert to fight alone, because it wasn't right. Immediately afterward, a huge army of skeletons moved to attack and began to attack their opponent Huge Slash. While dozens of skeletons distracted the monster, little Robert took the plan to attack from the flank and began to implement it. With quite a bit of success, he managed it, jumped, and was able to strike with a very highly energized punch. The squad captain began to turn to the other members and ask about whether they wanted to go down and help Michael. Dan immediately condemned the idea. He called it crazy and not right at all, for Michael had chosen such a road himself. However, here, the rest of the guys supported the captain's idea. Using their pets, they began to attack the enemy. Already after a couple minutes of such intense attacks, most of his bones were broken that it was causing him critical damage. The guys continued to attack, but their opponent wasn't that weak. He began to curl the energy in one spot of his body. Michael was watching everything that was going on, and in a moment of shock, he noticed that their ribs were open in his opponent, and that's a pretty important part. At the same moment, a huge aura of energy rose up and descended from the ribs of the huge monster and began to tear down everything around it. Our squad all together began to accumulate energy and immediately channel it into the creation of a super shield, and Michael thought about what could be done in such a situation. The assistant captain at this moment was trying to contact his monster, the demonic wolf, but there was no way he was getting a response from it. The kid who was rescued began to complain that their whole attack had gone down the drain because they couldn't defeat the monster. The one in turn began to attack even more intensely, aiming huge chunks of bones directly at our heroes. The guys were discussing among themselves how they could stop this attack because the distance was still quite large. Michael at this point asked for Robert, his appetite he is so, which he successfully managed, surprising everyone else. He explained to the assistant captain that Robert had used one strong technique before the fight even started, which was why he had that power now. The assistant captain watched Michael's back and talked about how an adequate man couldn't have come up with such tactics. But he could. The enemy began to use the absorption energy technique and sucked everything around him inside. Dan was frightened and immediately began to run away. Instead of cleaning up, Robert began attacking on Michael's orders, which worked out quite well. With just one, perfectly thought-out such, Robert managed to strike a critical blow so this monster. A couple minutes after that, the enemy was completely defeated, the little skeleton Robert standing on his head like a victor. The guys were shocked to bits by this. They asked Michael how this happened, and how he was able to know all the vulnerabilities of such a monster. Michael explained that this monster lived just like Robert. His body is only a shell, and all the power is inside. He also mentioned that for the start of this fight, he was still a little doubtful about his theory, but now it has turned out to be completely correct. In a moment, all the guys noticed some sort of energy flow upwards and began to immediately think that the monster was agile again. Lucas began to ask Michael, his littles do, and what they could do about this situation now. But Mykova explained that now that monster is just a puppet of Robert, and do not worry, which surprised everyone around. The deputy captain asked them not to pay attention to all these details, but to get on with finding the missing person, because that was their main mission. However, here, Michael asked everyone to stop and said something that he had one unfinished mission left. Our hero began to walk forward straight towards Dan. The assistant captain tried to stop him, but these attempts were useless. Dan was immediately startled. He activated his shield and began to ask Michael what he was going to do. Our hero gave an order to Robert to deprive Daw on his hands. He carried out this order, and Michael said to be careful. Michael then turned and said that he had only kept him alive because of his respect for the assistant captain. He also added the fact that if suddenly once again he notices some misbehavior, he will no longer regret life. Dan grabbed his arm and started running somewhere away, shouting a bunch of times beforehand. Lucas began to turn to the assistant captain and ask about what it was and how there should be a response to it. The guy who was rescued intervened in the dialogue and said that she supported Michael because Dana didn't have a pure heart. The captain began to turn to the guys they had rescued and ask about whether they knew anything about the Firefox they were looking for. The guy couldn't remember anything, but the girl talked about how she had heard of something similar and was trying to remember. Our hero Michael at one point notices that his pet Robert has spotted some rubies and wants them very badly. Michael himself stated that he was also learning something, after which he asked to borrow a flare gun. Using his gun, he shot straight down the cave and creating a huge light, he spotted the Firefox they were looking for there. This greatly pleased Michael himself and the assistant captain. They had not expected to manage so quickly. Immediately afterward, the boys decided to go downstairs and scout out the situation inside. It was indeed the same Firefox that had the entire squad worried. The assistant captain announced that the mission could be considered completed, so all could begin creating the portal and heading home. However, our hero Michael noticed something and asked the assistant captain to hold the horses. Michael, along with Robert, found some crystals and immediately started touching them to see what they were. Lucas intervened. Using his instruments, he began to examine this stone to see what the crystals were. After examination, he stated that no matches with popular crystals were found and hence it is an unknown stone. Afterwards, Michael noticed that the guys just started walking away. This caused him to misunderstand. And Lucas explained to Michael that he was still just a beginner and didn't know about the fact that this kind of fireplace was very dangerous for them to collect. The aide also stated that it was useless, because looking for useful runes here is like looking for gold in the sand. He also added that time is a very valuable resource and no one would want to just waste it here on useless things. Here, however, Michael didn't think so at all. He looked at Robert, who treasured the nonsense, and realized that she was special. Some time passes, our squad returns home, and Michael receives an invitation from a rescued girl but enrolls in university. Lo and behold, however, our hero casually dismisses it and talks about how using the system and searching for minerals pleases him. Michael leaves, and the girl realizes what the story directly says about her wanting Michael as a teacher, not a student. The next morning comes, our hero Michael comes out of his room and meets Jessica, who is once again displeased with something. Jessica is also busy trolling Michael and talking about how, unlike him, she wakes up every morning to work out. Our hero Michael silently shows an approving gesture, walks away, and talks about how very proud he is of her. This embarrasses Jessica quite a bit, and she starts kicking her legs and talking about how she doesn't need that kind of praise. Michael heads to his bed. He lies down and examines the system, learning all sorts of new information for himself. Today, the subject of her study and became a golden raven. Quite rare and very interesting monster with extraordinary strength. The system tells us that after its climax, this monster became so powerful that it crumbled even the stars. Also told that in ancient times, this monster managed to capture half of the universe because he was extremely strong. With the help of the system, Michael was able to get a chance to become this very monster, but he was intimidated by the possibility of changing his body. Michael thinks about the fact that this is quite an interesting opportunity, because in this world, all the weak live without respect. Thinking back to all those moments where he was abused, he decides to take that step and play by the rules of this world. The next day, Michael has a delivery guy come to his house. They bring a lot of different new stuff. After that, our hero transports all of them to the warehouse and to his laboratory, where he is going to use them to their full potential. In the process itself, he applies energy that helps him manage it all faster, saving a tremendous amount of time. Using various complex techniques, our hero manages to cover his body with energy, which helps him a lot. Michael quickly opens all the drawers that hold all the ingredients he needs that he bought instead of collecting himself. In his head, he comes up with a complete plan of his actions, following which he will be able to gain unfulfilled power. But here the unexplored problem remains this very ore that Robert liked. Michael asks the system to explore its slots. If the system can't apply this ore anywhere in the ingredients, there it offers to create special animal sections out of it. However, even after this our hero became too many crystals, they began to think about what to spend them on. Immediately afterward, Roxy's electronic watch received a call from our hero, straight from the store. She happily started asking Michael how you were doing, and he asked her directly if she was happy with her mouse's current strength. Roxy cheered like a child in response and talked about being very, very happy with her new power, much to Michael's chagrin. In response to this, Michael, who asked Roxy something, to which she could not give a refusal, became even happy that the opportunity came. Cab came to Michael's lab. He started asking her about how the competition and the system worked, to which she gave clear answers. Based on her answers, our hero Michael learns that there is a 9th degree of development that is greater than basics. Together with Roxy, Michael heads outside. They're going to walk straight to the stadium, and Michael explains the fact that he won't discount the prices. On the way, Roxy meets some guy, he greets her, and asks her to stop near him for a while. The kid greets her and talks about how he wanted to thank her in advance, because his dragon has gotten much stronger. Roxy chats with him, and Michael points out at that moment that this is most likely the same man who once was able to win. This same kid turned to Roxy and asks her not to use her Thunder Mouse for the next match, much to her surprise. Roxy is in a rather sad state of mind talking to him, while Michael is still watching it all and analyzing their dialogue. The kid starts to walk away and wishes Roxy good luck, saying that their next fight is going to be pretty interesting. Michael turns to this guy, named Alex, and talks about how in the next fight, Thundermouse won't lose to him. Alex pays attention to Michael, and starting to ask Roxy who he is, she briefly introduces our hero. Michael also greets Alex, then in turn realizes that it is most likely our hero who has nurtured such immense mouse power. He immediately began to see Michael as a huge competitor, and pondered the fact that this could bring a lot of problems for him in the future. Michael replies that Alex will be able to view him from different angles, but he is not going to discount him at all. Immediately afterward, Micah raises his hand, shows the number 5, and adds that this, with 3 zeros, is the price of his services. Alex is wildly surprised. He can't believe the price he's been quoted for all this, and ponders the divine favors there. Michael talks about how if it's expensive for Alex, he can't do anything about it. Alex turns his head away and talks about how money is not a problem for him, and he will get any amount he needs. Michael, along with Roxy, arrive on the scene, right in the stadium, and starts watching other people's fights. The time comes when it's time for Roxy to enter the arena. She pulls out Thundermouse and prepares for battle. Maycom also enters the arena. He starts stroking Barsik and talking about how it's been a long time since they've seen each other. Barsik immediately abruptly runs away from Michael to Roxy and begins to hide behind her legs, which greatly surprises our hero. Alex looks at it all with a smirk. He's thinking about how Michael is quite the bumbling coach. He's not to be feared at all. Roxy in turn decides to attack. She summons the Phoenix and tells it that it is time for battle, and the attack begins. Alex decides that he should also act and summons a huge dragon, saying that he is also starting this battle. In just a couple minutes, the fight had already begun. The Phoenix faced the dragon, and the contest between the two began. Roxy notices that her Phoenix loses a lot. She doesn't want to let that happen, and shouts words of encouragement to him so he doesn't fall. Alex at this point notices that he's doing well, so starts adding more power to his dragon. Together with the dragon, Alex picks up a huge stream of energy, starts to use it directly against his opponent. The Phoenix takes off sharply and starts attacking, and just like that, it gets so big that Roxy has to use her shield. However, after only a couple of such attacks, the Phoenix fell down completely pissed off and couldn't get up properly, much to Roxy's surprise. Roxy ran up to the Phoenix and started to try and recover it, but she was already thinking about the fact that it was dead. Alex talks about how this fight is already too boring for him. He doesn't expect anything from it at all, and is ready to win. At this point, Michael comes into play. He uses his own energy on himself and charges it to Barsik. Jessica notices that Barsik is abruptly charged with too much energy and has become very angry. Michael gave the order to Barsik, his massive amount of energy shunned by the enemy, dealing damage time after time. The mouse began to attack with great speed, once with me on different sides at once, then took the opponents by surprise. And in the moment, Michael and Roxy's opponents used freeze on them, then covered them with ice. However, lo and behold, even that couldn't properly restrain the Thunder Mouse. It was still attacking from all directions and couldn't stop. Alex's dragon continued to use massive amounts of ice. His tactic was to freeze his opponents. In the moment, Michael smiles and talks about how this whole time has been one huge deception by Alex, and now he's going to see it. A huge blast of energy comes right at the dragon from the side, from one of the Thunder Mouse clones. This becomes a critical hit. People who came to the scene of the battle were in complete shock. They had not seen such a heavy battle for a long time. Alex is in wild shock. He doesn't closely understand what is happening and doesn't know how to deal with it. Michael begins to use his energy on himself, and Roxy. By doing so, he removes the ice created by the dragon. Alex orders his dragon to charge at the enemy with tremendous speed and energy power. Our hero calls it a very interesting move, but adds that it's very much in bad taste. The mouse in the moment starts attacking with its mouth, releasing a huge amount of energy directly into the enemy. The energy hit so hard that it practically tore the dragon apart and caused irreparable injuries. Alex is in wild shock. He doesn't understand how Thunder Mouse managed to defeat his huge dragon so easily. Michael began to approach Alex and talk about how his offer to improve the pet for money was still active. Alex gets upset. He talks about transferring the money and asks about whether his monster can become as strong. Our hero starts to leave, but his phrase surprises Roxy a lot. She doesn't want anyone stronger than her. Among themselves, observers of this show are discussing the fact that Michael is a pretty interesting and important person, with a lot of promise. Here, however, the Commander-in-Chief is pretty pissed off that he doesn't know Michael at all, hence the release of something. Some time passed. Michael was with Roxy in the room, and in a moment, she made it known that someone wanted to see him. It was the people from Monster University, namely the Watchers, who were very much interested in Michael. They began reaching out to Michael and trying to get into his confidence to have a more constructive dialogue. The director turned to Michael and asked him if he would like to go to their training, mentioning that his activities were not important right now. This surprised Roxy a lot. Twice as much as Michael himself, she had never expected him to get such an offer. However, our hero did not move an eye. He continued to drink his coffee and declared that it did not interest him at all. This surprised the principal, and he turned to Michael and asked about what would happen if they added a scholarship. The assistant principal told him more about Michael, then began to look at our hero with very surprised eyes. Michael started responding to him in a very strange way, both shutting his mouth and talking about how he didn't mean to say it. They began to approach Michael and offer him higher positions at the university, which surprised Roxy even more. However, our hero replies that he is not going to go to any such lengths at all, which surprises the whole question. Instead of him began to shout Roxy, she repeated time after time that she agreed to such a venture, then caused Michael himself no concepts. The assistant principal asked for Michael and stated that she wanted him as a faculty member at their university. This suggestion made Roxy even more interested. She was very much shocked, however, Michael was not surprised. But she also adds the fact that Michael will have infinite access to resources. This has him very much interested. These were the sentences that interested Michael very much, whereupon he smiled, grinned, and made it known that he agreed. Time went forward, and our hero found himself in one of the classes of the university, was eerily surprised at how many books there were. The assistant principal explained to him that it was all worth learning in order to start teaching full-time. Seeing the rather shocked look on Michael's face, the principal approached and explained that these were all standards for the most common faces. But after that, he immediately added that since Michael is a pretty capable guy, all he would have to do is pass a physical strength test. Michael was taken to a special room, introduced to his electronic enemy, and informed that he was worth defeating rather quickly. The director explained that if Michael lasted even a minute, the test would count him using it. But the celestial beasts couldn't be used. Immediately after that, the fight began. With a huge stream of energy, the monster attacked Michael, but he dodged them and attacked back. Michael tried to make a calculation on his super shield. However, it did not help him in this battle and immediately broke. Because of his carelessness, Michael let the monster toss him and finds himself in a critical position for the air he can't dodge. Michael, as well as the monster, began to use very strong techniques against each other. However, Michael was still out of favor. The moment Michael was tied up and the flow of energy directed towards him, the situation reached its most horrific moment. The assistant principal suggested stopping the test, but the principal himself stated that Michael for help didn't know yet, so there was no problem. The director looked at Michael and talked about how he hadn't reached critical moments yet, the strength he had. Along with the assistant, the director notices that their monster is starting to cook up an inordinate amount of energy. And our hero Michael at this moment does not react at all, as if he does not even notice it, and continues to just hang. However, after just a second, energy begins to splash out of Michael in different directions and breaks the nets created by the monsters. The amount of energy in his body was now at its maximum. With his landing alone, he had shattered an entire floor. Immediately after, he headed towards his monster opponent, and with just one blow he disposed of it, completely shattering it. The director along with the assistant and came to a wild horror. They could not believe that Michael is so strong. They stared in surprise at Michael's back, unable to believe that their main vehicle had been destroyed. Our hero Michael regains consciousness and notices that he has not even used all of his powers, but only some of them, which upsets him. The old man goes downstairs to Michael and starts asking him what he's unhappy about at a time like this. He's totally fine taking the test. Michael talks about how if he passed the test, that's where they can say goodbye and he'll go to his house. The principal says goodbye to Michael and tells my house to remember to have class once a week. As our hero walks, the principal tells the assistant that Michael has a secret drill, and he started it recently. The director instructs the assistant to look into it all. He talks about how Michael's store 100% will have clues. Our hero appears nearby in the moment, says that it's all nonsense, and asks in return to be given only the resources he needs and nothing more. You and I moment passes some time. Our hero returns home and begins to change clothes before diving into normal life. Immediately afterward, his sister calls him to dinner and all the while gets very angry with him, for he has become too strong. Our hero's mom asks him to stop choosing microloans and talks about how he can just ask her for money. In response, however, Michael opens his account and shows them how much he's made this month. The next morning, our hero goes to his store. Some customer immediately complained to him. She asks Michael about whether the rumors about him being the one behind the Thundermouse grow are true. Our hero stands up and says that everything is correct and immediately clarify about the issue on which they came to him. A girl named Anfisa talks about how she has 4 beasts and she wants them all to be stronger than a Thundermouse. Michael replies that the effect of nurturing a Thundermouse was unusual, and now only the usual ones are available. For a while, Anfisa ponders what is best to do, and is well aware of the fact that Roxy has overtaken her. Anfisa starts to leave and talks about looking for services elsewhere. This doesn't please Michael. He tries to stop her. The system informs our hero that this task he must necessarily fulfill because it is quite expensive. Our hero says that he is ready to take this order, but reminds that the effect of nurturing will be expensive. Anfisa asks the price and tells Michael that she doesn't have that much money and is willing to consider basic options. Michael names a price of 1 million and Anfisa immediately asks him, there if he rents the store. He asks not to worry about his reputation and says that if additional information is needed, it is on the university's website. Anfisa opens the database in her watch and starts checking, and is shocked to discover that Michael is a martial arts master at the Celestial Beasts. Upon learning this, Anfisa begins to bow down and talk about how she is apologizing profusely for her disrespect. Michael asks to be called either teacher or boss and talks about giving the nurture money later. Our hero takes Anfisa's first pet. He pulls out the systems, begins to study the characteristics for improvement. He'll immediately point out that the nurture level is very similar to Thundermouse, and that could play into his hands. Meanwhile, some strange guys started walking towards Michael's store, talking about apparently coming the right way. Right behind these people, more people came in whole groups, all of them heading to Michael's to place orders. However, lo and behold, our hero is by this point traveling to another world in order to gather the resources he needs. Together with himself, will select different pets, and after that creates a pendant from his energy, because in the upcoming world will be a lot of challenges. After a couple minutes, they all start rolling together somewhere, arriving near the lava rubble, which scares each other. However, Michael immediately discovered that this lava was not hot at all, but even a little pleasant. He makes the decision to try her out completely. Since he has resurrection anyway, it won't be critical. With great joy, our hero absorbs massive amounts of this magma, absorbing it and creating an influx of energy. His clone tries to do the same, however only begins to burn afterward. Michael asks him to stop. Michael plunges into the lava and asks everyone else to start the climax, saying that there isn't much time left. While he swims freely in the catch and enjoys it, his bow holds the rest of the monsters back in shock. Noticing that they are not very eager to go down, our hero uses the system to summon them and put them down. thus bathed them in lava. Our hero improved them greatly, then brought them back to the normal world. But he also realizes that right now he needs to concentrate his energies on the very pig they are fiddling with, the little monsters. Michael informs the system that he wants to improve the spiritual veil system. The energy around him begins to splash. Using the flow energy system, Michael is trying to achieve gaining new powers as well as a new pet of at least level 6. However, at this moment, red lightning bolts appeared over the city, straight up in the sky, conducting huge peals of thunder. All these blows went to one place, exactly where our hero was standing. Right at his feet came an eruption of energy. In a moment, right from that energy, a huge dragon that was named as the Serpent of Purgatory appeared. It became Michael's new pet that he had gotten through the system. It was level 9 and had the status of practically a king. Michael immediately began to look at him and realized how peerless, strong, beautiful, and terrifyingly powerful he was. However, Michael didn't want to show everyone around him such abilities and covered his mouth with his hand alone. This monster was not yet intimately familiar with Michael, so the latter explained to him that this place was not vulnerable to him, since it was his store. Meanwhile, some old man named Gulliver showed up at the university with a powerful pet. He was chatting with his assistant when suddenly their dialogue was interrupted by Michael's abrupt appearance, just out of nowhere. As it turns out, our hero was testing his pet and said there that it was pretty fun to fly and very comfortable. Our hero's sister Jessica was at the same college. She was sitting in class and discussing with her classmates the new teacher's admissions. She turned to her classmates and asked them not to gossip, adding that these dialogues don't matter anyway. At the moment, the assistant principal, along with our hero and Gulliver, entered the hall. She introduced Gulliver as assistant principal, Michael as her assistant, for they would both be of great use in this class. Seeing Michael, all the guys were shocked, because he was their peers, but he was already teaching at such a university himself. But most of all was surprised Jessica, Michael's sister, when she saw her brother as a teacher at the school. Our hero began to ask the schoolman not to be surprised so much and to talk about how he is very strong and will help to learn a lot. Gulliver asked Michael not to be so presumptuous, saying that he was only teaching his first day. Jessica didn't believe Michaela would get anywhere. She had already accepted her shame and the title of loser sister. Gulliver also had no faith in Michael. He approached him and asked him to demonstrate his abilities so they could trust him. After realizing everything that was happening, our hero immediately realized that he would really have to prove his strength, and then called a small skeleton. The guys in the audience started laughing at me. They couldn't believe that such a thing was possible, and Michael was about to embarrass himself so badly. Gulliver began to ask Michael not to worry, and talked about how he would definitely help him if anything happened. All this sad atmosphere pissed off Robert a lot. He already wanted to start attacking, but Michael restrained him. Jessica was very embarrassed, for her taking summoned the weakest demon possible of the type. But in just a second, Michael withdrew all the restraints off Robert and asked him to attack the side, creating a large stream of energy. Seeing the gigantic power of this little skeleton, all the guys were shocked, because they didn't expect it to have such a big level. The guys were wildly shocked at the result that the ordinary little skeleton showed, all by himself. Alex, who was in class, immediately realized that his dragon couldn't even come close to equaling that level of power. Jessica was also very much surprised. She started to talk about how she couldn't believe such immense strength of the little skeleton. Michael turned to everyone and asked if anyone else needed to see his power, or if that was enough. Gulliver did not understand how in such a situation Michael's titball, because he broke the class of very expensive material. Our hero got into a rather combative pose. He turned to everyone and asked about whether he needed to be persuaded of the force by anyone else. Michael turned to everyone and asked why they were silent, and also asked if he could now begin the lesson by showing his powers. Immediately silent, they stopped arguing, and at the assistant principal's command, opened the correct page of the textbook. The class ends, along with the principal. Michael starts to leave, but he is met by a certain guy and immediately greets him. This guy turns out to be Thomas, who introduces himself as a friend of Michael's and talks about how they haven't seen each other in a while. Together with the director and Thomas, our hero heads to the lab, where they are having a nice tea and discussing something. Thomas reported that he had asked many people to leave the Lyceum as he had very important business to discuss. The director also announced that he had some news, as an elite tournament among many wrestlers is coming up very soon. The director approaches Michael and talks about approving a 24-hour vacation for Michael to participate. However, here our hero refuses. He talks about how the store is over the top, so he doesn't have time at all. Michael realizes that he has enough money right now, and if he wins the tournament, he will become world famous, and he doesn't need that. Thomas turns to Michael and offers to explore the secret underground kingdom together, and this proposal is already interested in our hero. He talks about the different events in that location and how many valuable resources there are to get your hands on. Thomas adds that he's been trying for a long time to get a commissioning permit and finally did. But because of the tournament, he won't be able to take Michael. Michael starts thinking about both offers and talks about how he'd like to consider this trip with Thomas more. A couple days pass until the moment. One evening, Michael closes his store from customers and doesn't have time to answer everyone. Michael talks about how he apologizes profusely to everyone, but he has a lot of pressing matters that are very important to him. He closes up store and realizes that he can't get used to such a huge growth in his business at all because the orders are getting bigger and bigger. Our hero is well aware that we are also worth taking the time to practice, closing up store completely and calling the system and culminating. Using the system, our hero explores what he has to do, realizing that he's already on the nose for departures with Thomas. After reviewing the information, he decides to go to his pets and see how they're doing and if they are okay. He notices that one of the dogs is being energized and puts his hand near it to check it out. Right after that, the system informs our hero that he has just made a contract with it, and now it's important. He begins to ponder the fact that most likely the owner of this dog died without ever picking it up from the store. After that, our hero decides to take this dog with him to training, under the pretext that it will be a great companion. However, lo and behold, he takes not only her along with him, but all the other monsters he has in order to raise their levels. Together with them, he finds himself in one of the illusory worlds in which he will have to spend some more time. A monster appears at the top. It starts breathing energy, then creates huge waves on Michael and his partners. Well, even in the face of such trouble, our hero is not cowardly at all and talks about taking on this fight and challenge. Then a huge sun dragon appears from the ground, which in all likelihood will be our hero's new adversary. The dragon tells of something secret that happened here once, and then his blood and flesh shattered, flying downward with a charge of energy. This heavily infected the ground, causing monsters to appear below and afterward break out. Michael begins to realize that he's being tricked and things will turn out very differently in reality, but that doesn't change the fact that the ordeal is going to be tough. Together with his monsters, our hero enters some gates of the building, but notices that there is no light inside at all. But the fact that this is the place of the dragon, our hero immediately realizes when he feels on himself a huge aura of something pressure, obviously very powerful. He also begins to hear different animal voices from all directions, which gives a complete sense that the place is haunted. Our hero decides to turn on the light using his "I've got a watch" and notices that there is a huge tower of bones in front of him. Michael stood still and couldn't figure out what was going on in the building, as in a moment from behind someone tried to attack him with a sword. Here, however, took in the scribe Robert and covered his master with his body, which strongly protected him at that moment. Our hero immediately thought that most likely the second article was alive as it was, and at that moment he was attacked from behind with a sword. Using his powers and the powers of the statue as well as skill, our hero manages to save the lives of himself and his pets. But right at that moment, a huge number of things began to strain and head straight towards Michael. Right at that moment, Robert became active again. He stood up for his owner like a true hero. Michael pulled Robert back and took the blow for himself, but in a moment, both swords stopped abruptly. Using the system, our hero immediately realized how to use this building and where all the traps are located. Using his new knowledge, Michael immediately went directly to the dragon, overcoming all the traps. The dragon immediately began to attack our hero. He did not want to communicate at all, and to think about something like that, starting his attack. He immediately realizes that this dragon's aura is deadly, but he should not be afraid of it, because this way he will trap himself. Even after that, the assignment was over. Michael was back home with his pets, and all you could do was not be scared of the dragon. Michael sighs quietly and talks about how happy he is with the results, as they did a near-perfect job on such a tough assignment. The very next morning, a huge crowd immediately formed from Michael's store, demanding that he open it and take orders. Our hero, being very alert and observant, he immediately rode his bicycle to his store at the right time. When they saw him, everyone was overjoyed, as Michael is a professional at what he does, and they would love to wait for him some more. Our hero is watched by his sister Jessica. She wants to know how he became so strong so quickly. Michael talks about changing the rules and asks everyone to stand in a line and then split up into lines afterward. Amidst all these people, Alex bursts out, walking very smartly straight to the jersey and paying attention. Michael looks directly at Alex, and the crowd at this point split up on the sides and started rioting that someone had overtaken them. Seeing this, Jessica comes to even more shock. She can't understand closely what a champion like Michael like Alex is doing here. Alex talks about how Michael certainly has a lot of orders, but he's here to remind him about his dragon and Michael's promise. Our hero's sister was scared shitless. She thinks this dragon is very strong and thinks Michael has nothing to match. Alex turns to Michael in turn and says that he must have been in great amazement when he saw his powerful dragon. Our hero the whole turn? I'm not too happy about it at all. He knows through the system how many materials he needs to improve. It doesn't make him happy. Cal talks about how he's hardly ever worked with a dragon type and summons a dragon of his own to demonstrate. Immediately afterward, a fire dragon appears behind his back, the same one that recently appeared to Michael. A huge number of customers simply fell to the floor from the terror and the immense pressure of such powerful energy. But Alex was most surprised when his great dragon also fell under the oppression of Michael's pet fire energy. Alex begins to wonder why this is happening, but Michael immediately answers him that all his guesses are wrong. Michael talks about how pedigree is to blame for everything, much to Alex's surprise. We have the hero well aware that Alex is not at all knowledgeable about the topic, so he briefly explains the whole point to him. He in turn shifts, says that he has understood everything, although in fact a huge part of the information is not clear to him. Michael asks Alex to relax and tells him that he remembers his desire to improve his dragon and will help at the first opportunity. From behind the wall, Jessica is watching it all. She is in a huge already from what she has seen and the strength of her brother. That moment passes some time, the evening comes, our hero sits his laboratories and ponders what spending is better. He is well aware that all his wants require a lot more spending, and thoughts of how to make so much money clog his head every day. The situation is already so interesting that he contemplates starting to go on dangerous hikes, in which he can make a good living. The events of our story takes us to some guy with piercings. He sits at home and ponders the fact that all websites are full of scammers. The kid's name is John, and he's pretty pissed off that he can't find a good handyman for his type of pet. Meanwhile, our hero Michael stays in one of the main places of the city, in the very center. Here he plans to find additional income, because in such places the most money rotates. However, here's the trouble. Right on the way out of the car, our hero is stopped by security and told that he doesn't look like a local. Using his watch, Michael immediately begins to verify the information about himself to prove it to the guard. He calls out the name of an important man from the university and says he has a meeting with him. Meanwhile, a guy named John has a battle with one of the robots. He fights himself without the monsters using energy. He's doing a great job, using his powerful fists to take down robots one by one. Right during this fight, the guard brings Michael into the room and welcomes him to Jonah as a guest. John folds his hands together kindly and speaks of how pleased he is to see Master Michael at his place. Our hero starts to consider the training ground. The guard says that he doesn't want to disturb, so he leaves them. The first thing that confuses John is that Michael looks very young. He thinks about the fact that such a person can't help. Michael talks about John owning a demonic type pet, and he has a lot of experience with that type, so he can give advice. Such phrases confuse John. He doesn't understand how a person weaker than him can be helped by raising a monster. Michael turns to John and asks about whether he just tried to test his strength with his eyes. This confuses John quite a bit. He can't understand how our hero managed to figure it out. Michael declares that this moment doesn't matter that much, but the fact that John doesn't trust him is already important. So our hero decides to give John more credit. He asks him to put energy into his right hand and punch him. John declares that he would be happy to do so, but asks Michael not to ask for damages afterward. Here, however, John circumstates and notices that he has a very hard time concentrating his energy in his hand. Michael puts his hands behind his back at this point and begins to gather energy himself, which he does much more successfully. John himself is straining very hard, but he is still failing, unable to muster even the slightest bit of energy. At this point, our hero decides that waiting is futile, so he directs all of his energy directly at John. Using his energy, Michael instantly tossed John aside, much to his surprise as no one had ever done that before. John begins to get very angry, but increasingly believes that Michael really is a professional at what he does. After which he apologizes and talks about wanting to know what Michael's rank is now. Michael starts to improvise. He talks about John not being worthy yet means call. If he doesn't believe it, he can try to attack. John apologizes, however he doesn't change his aggressive attempts to act at all, after which summons monsters. Using the system, our hero Michael immediately determined the type of these monsters and the defense, strength, and how they would act. One of these monsters began to block Michael's view, and the other at that moment to attack. Thus, they worked expeditiously. Using a huge buildup of energy, our hero simply grabbed one of the monsters, spun it overhead, and sent it sideways. John became angry. He couldn't believe that some ordinary schoolboy, Michael, could defeat his monsters with his bare hands. Michael realizes that it is likely that these monsters may attack again, so begins to build up more energy near him. For more strength and confidence, our hero summons a fire dragon he has yet to meet. The creature's "ah" alone was enough for John to begin covering his ears, unable to bear its presence. Michael stops being aggressive, and John follows. Now they are on a good note discussing pets and their development. John tells Michael about how he really likes the demon type a lot, as these monsters are always strong and brave. On someone, and at the same time John complains that raising such monsters is just hell and very hard work. John actively continues to tell Michael everything, but is also tired of listening to him, so they ask him to slow down. Michael talks about how he has a very good and unique solution to solve John's problem, and pulls a special resource out of his sweatshirt. John to ask about if this is that special material that is very rare and unobtainable. He immediately realizes how valuable it is, and asks Mike what price he would be willing to sell such a masterpiece for. Our hero declares that it will cost John 1 million, and first he asks for the money, only then he will give the goods. Michael joins John to make a deal. After it is successful, Michael hails a cab and prepares to go home. The events of our story nose forward. It took Michael about an hour to arrive home. At home, he is immediately met by his mother and sister, who offer to go out to eat, because most likely for the whole day, Michael is hungry. Our hero walks around the table, apologizes for being away from home so long today, talks about being very busy. He's also greatly surprised that the whole table is so heavily set today, since usually only Jessica's leftovers are left by the time he arrives. Yes, and in general, Michael notices something, that the atmosphere has changed a lot and it bypasses him, which is not clear to him. Michael eats all the food with great joy and talks about how delicious it is. His mom wishes him a good appetite. Before going to bed, Micah meditates heavily and also summarizes the past day, noting their major accomplishments for the day. Not long before going to bed, Michael pulls out the system and starts checking the energy store, noticing a very favorable offer. Realizing the enormous benefit of such an offer, our hero immediately confirms it without thinking at all. Right on his body, he begins to feel a new supply of digital energy that carries the goods to him. A moment after that, the coveted elixir was in his hands, which he was overjoyed about. He didn't touch it with his hands, handling it with energy, viewing it from different angles for full understanding. Learning more information about it, our hero immediately realized that it would allow him to control his spirit sense as well. He also began to visualize the cool changes this ability would give him, for it promoted better energy. This ability is a level of almost maximum rank because it allows you to smash and create items. In our hero's situation, it also contributes to his cosmic spirit, which is also very important to him. From that moment, some time passes. Early in the morning, our hero and heading somewhere on a bicycle. Our hero is in a hurry to the reaction, which is about to start very soon at the university, so he starts to go faster. The people in the cars are very much surprised, as Micah's bike overtakes them all, which is very surprising. However, for our hero here is nothing unusual, because he has mastered the skill of using force. Meanwhile, right outside the university, there's a small high school brawl going on where guys are bullying each other. These guys who are being bullied are saying that they don't intend to put up with this for so long, and also that they don't know these are the whereabouts of this person. However, lo and behold, the abusers are not at all interested in this. They only ask the tamer's hand and continue to bully. Well, in a flash, right beside them, Michael appears, grabbing one by the arm and scaring the others with his appearance. He clasps their hands and talks about letting these guys go and never touching them again. The guys who were offended were very surprised, because Michael was the one they were looking for, and here he appeared by himself. The abusers at the university began to tease Mike as much as she did, calling him words and chasing him home under her mom's apron. Our hero began to pick up the energy and talk about how he had a very different opinion on the matter. One of the guys decided to pick a fight with him, but paid for it very quickly by having Michael unleash his energies on him. He began to lift his head up and ask what it was, for he could not understand at all how such a thing could have happened. The guys around him started accusing Michael of some kind of cheating, and he responded by saying that he was doing nothing of the sort and it was all arbitrary. Afterward, some of the guys started to aggressively go at Michael, saying that he had a lot of courage. One of them even awakened his pet's abilities under the pretense that he was now using them to their fullest potential. However, here, our hero didn't even pay attention to it at all, stating that it was all quite stressful and troublesome. Michael looked at his watch and stated that he had a lecture starting very soon, which is why he asked everyone to pull out their trump cards. Meanwhile, the events of the story take us to the principal's office. Along with his assistant, he is socializing with his guests. The director states that in the past competitions, they often lost and couldn't prove themselves. But now, it was their turn. Well, the director's competitors didn't believe it, reminding you that you used to lose the game every time. The principal of the other university, named Luis, began to say that his students had already arrived and he would soon gather them all. However, here they came upon an auto painfully awful. All were beaten, wounded in bandages. This caused Luis to be extremely indignant, but our university director, along with his assistant, laughed quietly, started yelling at them and asking about why they had swallowed their tongues and were just being silent. One of the students spoke sharply. He pointed his finger at our university director. He stated that their students had beaten them up. However, the principal was very surprised at this statement and could not believe it, for who could you find so strong? The third director stated that this meant nothing and asked for much more detail on the situation. The guys started lying and talking about how they were just caught off guard when they got to the match, and that was it. The third principal immediately signaled that if they dared to lie, no mercy would be expected. The rest of the guys realized that they had no choice, and now they should support their friend's theory, which they collectively did. Afterward, the third director began to ask our leader what this strange greeting was from the university. Our director decided to look into the whole situation in more detail and approached these guys and asked about the name of the offender. These guys were writing the kid and said his name was Michael, at which point the principal got really surprised.